and it is quite a privilege to talk to your network in India, and really good to see India taking integrated reporting forward. I think today I've selected a fairly short chat on integrated reporting in South Africa, and I've just pulled a few topics to talk to. Firstly, the 5-year journey that South Africa has been on, and just some aspects behind that. I always like to talk about the practical application of the integrated reporting elements and principles, so I certainly will spend some time on that this afternoon. And then very importantly, where does integrated reporting fit with other reporting frameworks and with the ongoing reporting requirements on businesses, and I'll give you some insights into that. I think very importantly, it's so useful to share our experience in South Africa as to what some companies have grappled with and how they've gotten things right, so I certainly will share some of those experiences. And of course, the South African journey continues, as does the global journey, and I'll leave you with some thoughts into what are the next steps and the most logical developments that we see coming out of integrated reporting going forward. And hopefully we'll have some time at the end, if I keep to my schedule, for some of your questions, and of course what we can't cover we can always engage with you after the webinar. So it has been 5 years of integrated reporting in South Africa, and I thought before I embarked on our experiences I would really just show you a layman's description of integrated reporting, because I'm often cornered and asked what this integrated reporting is all about, and my answer is it is a new approach to business reporting. It's a response to what was perhaps a failing set of frameworks behind corporate reporting and a need to take it to a new level. And very simply, it's reporting that is built around an organization strategy, which ultimately serves to create and sustain value in the short, medium, and long term. And so the key words there really is it's reporting around strategy, and it's all about value in the short, medium, and long term. A good integrated reporting process looks at two aspects of strategy. Firstly, have you developed an appropriate strategy relative to the material issues that you're up against as an organization? And secondly, are you successfully executing against that strategy in terms of the targets and outlooks that you've set for your particular organization? Recognizing that the failure or success of businesses often will come down to either the lack of a suitable strategy for the environment that they're operating in, or a management team and a business model that has failed to successfully execute strategy. So integrated reporting helps internal stakeholders and external stakeholders to look at the business at different angles. Firstly, management to focus on material issues and to ensure that they're managing performance against strategy. It allows investors to better understand strategy, performance, and outlook of where the business is going in the future. And of course, other stakeholders are able to better understand the business and its strategy against their particular expectations and concerns. So I hope this definition helps, again, just to reinforce where integrated reporting is trying to get corporate reporting. The next page really sets out how integrated reporting happened in South Africa in parallel to the global developments. And of course, our corporate governance code, which is called King 3, required integrated reporting on an apply or explain basis from February 2011 year ends onwards. And of course, at that stage, a framework was not in place, and South Africa put its own discussion paper out in January 2011 to guide preparers in putting the first integrated reports together. That was followed by the IIRC discussion paper in September 2011, which was built on very similar principles. And through a process of piloting with the international pilot group, of which a number of South African companies formed a part, a consultation draft was put out in April 2013. And of course, we've seen the framework version 1.0 being issued in December 2013. I think what is so important about this page is to reflect that integrated reporting was actually built around practice. And unlike most regulatory frameworks, which tend to write the framework up front and then expect corporates to comply with it, the integrated reporting framework developed by the IIRC was very much a collaborative and iterative process of working with users and preparers of corporate reports to make sure that the desired practice was eventually captured into the framework. And it really is a refreshing approach to the framework. Of interest in South Africa, we are in the process of putting together our next version of our corporate governance code, which will be called King 4. And what is quite refreshing, and we have not yet released this code for comment yet, it will come out in early 2016, is it's quite amazing to see how the integrated reporting principles and elements have actually now been woven into King 4 and reflect some of the current best practices in corporate governance within South African reporters. So it is ongoing. There certainly is still lots of work, and I'll touch on some of the future developments that we expect to see in the framework. But certainly it's a framework that can be used and is being used very effectively by South African and many global reporters as well. I'm going to take you through the elements and principles and really just talk very briefly to some of the elements and the IR principles, which I always find is important to get some perspective on how it's being applied in different jurisdictions. So what I'm going to take you through is a bit of a whistle-stop tour of the IR elements and just talk to each of them. And what you can see in front of you is what we fondly refer to as the integrated reporting wheel. And it's just a very refreshing way of looking at the elements and talking through corporates and users as to what integrated reporting is all about. So on the left we have our principles, and on the right-hand side the elements, which I'll take you through briefly now. So we start with basis of preparation and presentation, and I think the point here is there are so many corporate reports that are put out nowadays without any explanation of why the report was prepared and what users should or could be using that report for. So integrated reporting really pushes corporates to be purpose-driven in the reporting that they're putting out and to explain to users what their philosophy is behind putting the report together and what they expect users to use the information for. Most of these reports are geared towards investors, and organizations are encouraged to basically set out the purpose of the ability of the company to create and sustain value from an investor's perspective, and for the investor to make investment decisions based on the performance and prospects of the company. It's also important to set out what frameworks and scope of reporting have actually been used, and things like materiality and assurance need to be explained up front to the user as to how they go about relying on information. And of course, where supplementary reporting is used or navigation is required to get to particular aspects of the report, this is clearly explained up front. So it's very useful for reporters to take the time up front of their reports to explain to users how and why they put that report together. The other amazing thing about corporate reports is you'll pick up corporate reports and they'll immediately launch into a review of the performance of the company. But very often the user doesn't even understand what the company does and how it does that. So again, integrated reports look to the organization to set out what we do and how we do it. And what is quite refreshing in the integrated reporting framework is the business model, which sets out exactly the inputs that the organization uses, the processes and activities it follows in carrying out its activities, its outputs, and ultimately the outcomes that it is trying to achieve. It also sets out the external environment that the organization operates in, and very importantly, the resources and relationships it requires to operate its business. And this has come in the form of the 6 capitals, which sets out the financial, manufactured, people, relational, natural, and intellectual capitals that the organization needs in order to execute its strategy and to undertake its business model. Having understood what the business does and how it does it, it's so important to also understand who the key stakeholders are for a particular business. And here the organization is encouraged to set out who the most influential stakeholders are for that particular business in terms of their interaction. This could run from governments and regulators to shareholders and financiers. It could be customers, it's your own people, it's suppliers and business partners that you engage with, And of course, it's the community, media, and industry groups that you touch on in your business activities. It's important for the organization to demonstrate how you interact with these stakeholders, what the quality of your relationships are with the stakeholders, and how you responded to some of their key expectations and concerns about your organization. This interaction with stakeholders will often lead us straight on to what we call the material issues of the organization. And these are really the key risks and opportunities that you as an organization face in carrying out your strategic objectives and running your business. Emphasis here is that it's not just risk, it's also a very key focus on opportunities and recognizing that management are as accountable for opportunities as they are for managing risks within their business. But of course, the difficulty that most organizations face is analyzing and understanding the many risks and opportunities that they face and using a business materiality framework to distill those many risks and opportunities down to what we call material issues. And these are really your make or break risks and opportunities for your business, that if you manage well, you will fly high. If you do not manage or fail to take advantage of the opportunities, you typically could or would experience some form of business failure. This can typically narrow down to 6, 8. In some organizations where there's more complexities, it could be 12 or 14, but it really is a case of organizations prioritizing and trying to get a handle on this concept of make or break issues. Because that leads us to how the business is responding to these material issues. And that typically is going to be in the form of their strategy. Now, strategy is something which is not particularly well communicated externally or in many businesses internally. And it's so important to fully unpack an organization's strategy, not just in terms of the objectives of what you're trying to achieve, but very importantly what the underlying initiatives and enablers are to actually carry out and achieve those objectives. So here we're looking at specific activities, initiatives and processes that have been put in place to achieve objectives. We're also looking at different perspectives of your strategy in terms of short, medium and long-term initiatives, recognizing that some of these initiatives will only produce results and value in future years. And of course, we're going to ask the question as to whether your organization has the right resources and the right business model to actually execute your strategy. What gets measured gets done, and it is so important that businesses look to measure performance against strategy. And unfortunately, many businesses have been forced into measuring their performance against various frameworks, be they accounting frameworks like IFRS or sustainability frameworks like GRI, or the various governance and regulatory frameworks that are out there. But integrated reporting provides an opportunity for you to measure performance against your strategy, which is ultimately going to drive value within the business. And here we look at 2 levels of performance indicators. Firstly, lead indicators. And lead indicators are really measuring your inputs that you're putting into your strategy execution. And for example, if this was a company that was looking to increase its brand awareness, this could be your marketing spend. It could be the level of marketing initiatives that you have in the various markets you serve. And secondly, you're looking to lag indicators, which measure the outputs and the outcomes of your strategy execution. So using the same example of the company trying to raise brand awareness, the lag indicators would be some of the brand awareness scoring that you pick up on your research. And to the extent that there are increased sales behind the brand awareness, that would be a classic lag indicator. If you don't know where you're going, you're highly unlikely to get there. And here, integrated reporting looks to the organization to set targets for controllable performance measures within their organization, and to start providing a compelling view of where you want to get to as an organization. And I did emphasize that these targets are typically on controllable performance aspects. The uncontrollable aspects will typically be determined by the market in looking at value in your particular business. And of course, management needs to respond to those non-controllable factors. But when setting targets, this is not about putting forecasts out there, but indicating to users internally and externally where you as a management team are trying to take the business in terms of a view of your outlook and value proposition for the future. And of course, this is corroborated by your past performance and track record. I think we live in a world where governance is becoming more important, but what is most important about governance is the job to be done. And integrated reporting looks to users to demonstrate how governance and the various structures that you have in place support strategy development and execution within the business, with the objective of generating and sustaining value. And of course, looking at aspects like remuneration that is aligned to performance against strategy and value creation of the organization, as opposed to what we see too often is remuneration linked to short-term financial performance, which may certainly create some bad behaviors. The reason I always take you through what I call the IR wheel is it really demonstrates that integrated reporting is a business 101 framework. It's something anybody can understand, from an engineer to an accountant to a dentist or a farmer. And certainly in South Africa, it's been embraced that it's one of the first reporting frameworks that really follow business 101 rationale or logic. We put together an example of one of our larger mines in South Africa, which has recently put out an integrated report. And I just wanted to show you how the linkage of a particular aspect runs through the various elements. In South Africa, we have a dire shortage of electricity supply. We've been through a number of years of electricity disruption. And of course, as we seek to address the capacity issues, the cost of electricity is increasing. And of course, this presents a material issue to our mines in terms of continuity of supply and the cost of electricity on their production costs. Key stakeholders is our single electricity utility, our regulators, and of course, interaction with the government. This particular mine has chosen to address the electricity issue both from a short-term and a medium and long-term perspective. Firstly, in the short term, their energy efficiency initiatives have dropped their usage per tonne by 20% over the last 3 years. They've installed backup generator capacity at all of their mines to ensure that they can operate safely in the event of electricity disruptions. And ultimately, looking to a long-term solution, this particular organization is now developing an alternative renewable energy supply program and very seriously considering a coal-fired power station, which could generate as much as 60% of their own usage in 3 years. As we go through performance, you can see the KPIs that have been set out to measure and track the progress against both their short and medium and long-term strategy, and of course putting targets in place, which they have in fact shared with their investors and stakeholders, and also demonstrating that performance against this particular strategic initiative is linked to the bonuses and incentives of their executives and the teams that focus on this particular initiative. I think really what I want you to take out of this slide is the linkage and the ability to track and flow an initiative right through from what the underlying issue is and who the stakeholders concerned are, right through to what you're doing about it, how you're performing, where you want to get to, and how you're using this performance to incentivize your teams to execute against the strategy. The IR elements are then underpinned by the integrated reporting guiding principles, which I'll only go through very briefly with you, and they certainly underpin the elements I just spoke to now. Firstly, strategic focus and future orientation. It's really about building your integrated report around your strategy and not the various departments and divisions and disciplines within your business. Secondly, materiality and conciseness. By focusing on the most material issues, you are able to have a concise conversation and interaction with your key stakeholders and specifically investors on what really is going to drive value for your business going forward. Stakeholder responsiveness, it's to ensure that you are focused on your stakeholder expectations and that your reporting takes into account what their legitimate needs are from your business. Of course, reliability and completeness is so important, and what we're seeing with integrated reporting is it's so important to reflect a balanced and complete view of what is happening within your business. And investors are increasingly looking for transparency in terms of making sure that not only the good, but some of the bad aspects of the business are brought to light and discussed, and people understand what the business is doing to manage those areas. Connectivity was certainly brought out by the elements, and one can see that the linkage and logical flow of information is so important in a good integrated report. And of course, consistency and comparability. Although the integrated report is built around each organization's own strategy, you will often find commonalities in industry groups as to what the underlying material issues are. And one is able to benchmark and make some fairly important investment decisions as to how relative peers operate within a sector and across geographies, of course. To move on, I think it's quite important to show you where integrated reporting fits with the already sometimes exhausting reporting frameworks and requirements that you have within your business. And I often show up this page, which I call the sober up page. And really the sober up page is to indicate that integrated reporting does not, at least in the short term, make any of your other reporting requirements go away. So annual financial statements are here to stay. IFRS is certainly developing and will continue to develop into the future. And reporters just need to be very good at their financial reporting. Regulatory reporting, well, as the world's gone through the last crisis, the response has been a flurry of regulation being pushed to various sectors. South Africa is certainly not short of regulation, and with every regulation comes increasing reporting requirements on businesses. And again, businesses have to be efficient and on top of their game to make sure that they do this in the most efficient manner. Corporate governance reporting, as governance codes have developed, we've seen increased reporting requirements. Sustainability reporting has been around in South Africa for in excess of 15 years. It's a very mature discipline, and of course some sectors have to do some deep dive reporting in this area. And of course you've got to run your business at the end of the day, and your management reporting needs to flow through the business. So integrated reporting doesn't look to knock any of these reporting disciplines out, but tends to sit on the top of these reporting frameworks and draws off these particular streams the most pertinent and relevant information to strategy development and execution. And this is both for internal use and external use. And what we found as organizations have drawn off the most important information, they've often gone down into these underlying reporting streams and found a lot of redundant and inefficient information which is not being used, and cut that out in terms of some of their cut the clutter initiatives. So I think the message is integrated reporting is not going to make the other reporting disciplines go away, but it certainly can help you to be more efficient and concise in the way that you report internally and externally. What does an integrated report look like? So some people are quite disappointed when it doesn't look like the wheel. Well, it certainly reflects the wheel, but practically a report cannot be built solely on the elements. So like I said, this is typically what you see with South African reports, or the trend of reporting, where it's very clear up front how the report is put together, the approach followed by the company, and of course a good introduction to the report is set out. There will always be good insight into highlights. People want to get a snapshot view of how the business is performing, and you'll see most organizations are putting that out. But again, it's performance against strategy as opposed to just a whole lot of financial measures. Good insight into business models, which then leads to an analysis of material issues and a discussion on the context of those issues. Then the heart of the report is explaining the strategy and how the strategy is developed and evolved relative to the material issues. And then your performance review and outlook, which is typically a cascaded view of how the business is done against the strategy and where the business is heading in terms of outlook. And that could cascade down from the chairman, the chief executive, the chief financial officer talking to some of the financial aspects, and then a deep dive into some of the key operations within the business and how they are executing against strategy. And as I said, governance is all important. It's so important to demonstrate how that underpins and oversees strategy development and execution, and of course things like remuneration to demonstrate that that is aligned to performance against strategy and value creation. So that is typically not a prescriptive way that a report needs to be presented, but some of the more successful reports that we see in South Africa and globally will follow a very similar trend. It's also important to understand that the integrated report is typically the primary report of an organization. And I will say a good size for an integrated report is about 80 pages. But there certainly will be a need for certain specialized users to have more detailed information. And this typically in South Africa could take the form of a detailed corporate governance report, where an investor may be carrying out some sort of due diligence on the governance structures. Your annual financial statements, so your South African reports typically only contain summary financial statements in the integrated report, and of course many users need access to a set of annual financial statements which are typically housed on a website. Some of the more high-impact companies will produce expanded sustainability or corporate responsibility reports, again available online, and of course a myriad of other information may be housed that is relevant to the organization and available to users on a drill-down basis. So I think really the picture here is you've got your primary report supported by supplementary information based on various users' specific requirements and needs. So what are we seeing out there 5 years down the line? And I think this statement really encapsulates our observations. Really good integrated reports typically reflect businesses with well-developed that are properly understood and passionately executed by everyone in the business. And time again, when we work with our clients, poor strategy will often be reflected in poor reporting. And businesses that are really on top of these strategies and are able to explain it both internally and externally to investors and stakeholders are in a much better position to put a compelling report together. In South Africa, we've got an excess of 90% of our JSE companies are now producing integrated reports, but the quality ranges from poor or perfunctory right through to excellent reports. And again, the ability to produce a quality report is very much going to be dependent on the quality of the organization's strategy and its underlying processes. Those that have applied integrated reporting well have recognized that it is about the maturity of the concept of integrated thinking within the organization. I'll touch on that later. It's not about putting together another annual report to appease regulators and shareholders. It is about reflecting the development and execution of the strategy of the business and its ability to create and sustain value. And it's not about boilerplate regulated reporting, which is much easier to do than integrated reporting. It also requires critical analysis around the processes used to develop and execute the strategy in the business, and very importantly, how the business reports and manages performance against that strategy. We're always asked, what is the business case for integrated reporting? And that really has to be the driver for organizations to adopt it. I really feel 80% of the value of integrated reporting in South Africa has largely been from within organizations. And to an extent, 20% of the benefit is starting to come through in external stakeholders like investors, better understanding strategy and value propositions. So what am I talking about? Within the business, many executives have remarked that they're able to focus on the more important aspects of their business by looking at issues through the materiality business lens. Also, more robust consideration of risks and opportunities. So many organizations that were absolutely obsessed and focused on risk management have now started to more actively manage opportunities and also started to look at risk categories that they typically were maybe not looking at in the past. And this is very often the medium and long-term risks that were often ignored by management teams in favour of short-term risks. Integrated thinking and integrated management, trying to get your teams, your multidisciplinary teams within the business, to buy into one set of material issues and to buy into all executing against one group strategy, as opposed to disparate plans, strategies and issues that are often viewed at different angles within the business. Of course, it's a platform to communicate strategy more effectively. We really find organizations are not good at communicating strategy and driving strategy within their organizations. Enhanced performance measurement and this whole concept of measuring performance against strategy as opposed to performance against frameworks is quite refreshing. Aligning internal and external reporting, and what we've seen more and more is as businesses have developed their integrated reports to external stakeholders, that is starting to shape the way that they report internally to their board and to their executive committees and the various management teams within the business. And of course, it also helps to manage expectations and create more accountability around value creation and strategy execution. So those are some of the comments and remarks from various users over the past 5 years. The other question is, how are we going to get it right, and where do people get it wrong? And here we look at your critical success factors. The IR process has to be, in my mind, driven by leadership. And this has to at least be at the level of the chief executive, the chief financial officer, or a very strong personality within your executive committee. Without this leadership from the top, it really is going to be difficult to implement integrated reporting in its truest form within your business. It needs effective governance, planning, processes and systems, and here we typically see steering committees and work groups being put together that need to be very carefully project managed, and the right energy and enthusiasm needs to be installed into these teams. The project teams also need to be representative, and I always say, if you want to lose friends, don't invite them to your wedding, and if you want people to hijack integrated reporting, it's to not involve them. So here you're looking at involving all the disciplines within your business, from IT, legal, operations, company secretarial, finance, risk, and typically any part of the business that plays a meaningful role has to be involved up front. Integrated reporting has to be built around strategy and business model. And as I said before, if that strategy is not properly in place, it's going to be difficult to build a reporting process around it. It is a continuous process, and integrated reporting is not about producing a report once a year and the mad scramble that we often see in organizations. It is about instilling integrated reporting throughout the year. And what is reported through the integrated reporting process should be well known before year end and should really be a continual reporting process by the organization internally and externally. And of course, the use of technology, and it is possible to leverage the fundamental capabilities of most ERP systems to extend from just financial and sometimes fairly shallow operational reporting to much deeper KPI reporting around your strategies. Some of the challenges and realities that you're going to be up against, like I said earlier, it's not simply an amalgamation of financial sustainability and governance reporting. Many organizations have tried to couple these reports together and call it an integrated report. It is immediately apparent to a user that it is not an integrated report. Integrated reports have to be built around an integrated management process, and it will be very quickly evident from the outside as to whether or not you've implemented this. It does require transparency on strategy, and of course you need to balance your information sensitivity against the insight and quality of reporting that you're trying to get across to your investors. And there is, and certainly has been, some established practices of what the right level of sharing of information is. It requires setting of targets relative to strategies, and this calls on teams to become accountable to those targets going forward and to manage expectations relative to how you are performing against targets that you set for the business. It will require robust processes and systems. So most businesses that we work with have very good financial reporting systems and very often very poor non-financial reporting systems. And I'm not just talking about sustainability information. I'm talking about some of the key operational KPIs that are not particularly well reported or managed. And I think lastly, one of the most important points is integrated reporting does not happen in a year. And typically, to get integrated reporting properly installed within the organization can be anywhere between a 3 to a 5-year process. So lastly, where to from here? And as I said, the South African journey is certainly not over. And to move integrated reporting forward, especially in the quality of reports that are being put out by South African businesses, there does need to be continued engagement with investors. I often find it quite difficult to understand how investors make decisions using the current reporting requirements that they do. And it's so important that preparers engage with investors and make sure that the reporting and information we are producing is pertinent to how investors make decisions. Integrated reporting needs continued momentum. So although we're 5 years down the line in South Africa, there's still so much more best practice and business case benefits that can be seen from around the world. And it's so important to keep the momentum and development of integrated reporting going. There's still further clarification of some practical aspects of integrated reporting. I've just mentioned 2 here, which is materiality and how you go about the assurance of integrated reporting. And I'm pleased to say the IRC is acutely aware of these and is working on these particular aspects. We need to further develop concepts like integrated thinking, integrated governance, integrated assurance, and of course the whole technology play behind integrated reporting. And again, the IRC actively on these particular areas. Corporate governance, regulators and stock exchanges, to a certain extent to get integrated reporting up and going in many jurisdictions is going to take a little bit of a push from regulators, hopefully not on a compulsory basis, but certainly to get it moving in many parts of the world. We will eventually expect regulators and exchanges to make this a requirement. But what's most important is embedding integrated reporting as a concept in business, and even in the way we train our professionals and future business practitioners going forward. And in South Africa, we already see integrated reporting as part of the curriculum of many of our universities. And integrated reporting is really going to be driven by global trends and best practice as we go forward. And as we pick up momentum, this is really going to drive businesses to look at the business case of adopting integrated reporting going forward. That was a whistle-stop tour of integrated reporting, and I thought let's leave a little bit of time for questions and interaction, and we are most certainly happy to take any questions that you have in the webinar now, or you are welcome to contact myself or my colleague Santosh with any particular queries you may have, and our details are up there. So Roshali, perhaps over to you, and we can hear if there's any questions we have.
Sure. Thank you so much. That was